This thing is already one of my new favorite music production devices. What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today's video is a 2021 review of the Maschine Mikro MK3. For a little bit of context, I've really doubled down on the niche of groove boxes here on YouTube, which are completely self-contained music production devices. And I and a lot of you guys really enjoy diving into these devices and trying to get the absolute most out of them because they are often hands-on, fast and fun to work with, and overall just externalize the music production process from just staring at a screen to actually working with a physical device, often one that is fairly small and can fit easily in a backpack. So this actually checks a lot of those boxes. Normally, I would be reviewing something like a Novation Circuit or Roland MC101, but this is not self-contained. It's a controller for software that's built to work well with it. And one more little bit of context before I launch into actually reviewing this thing. A little while back, I got the opportunity to use the Maschine Plus for a couple of months. I had it on loan from a music retailing company that I've had an ongoing working relationship with, which has been really cool. So I really fell in love with it in terms of its workflow, in terms of the way it sounds, and even beyond objective things like tech specs or interface design. It was just some of the most fun I had had making beats in quite a while. The problem is that it's kind of underpowered. The Maschine Plus, unlike this, is entirely standalone. It can work entirely without a computer, so it basically has to become a computer. It's essentially a laptop crammed into a music production device, and it's a little underpowered for how many tracks and groups it's supposed to be able to have. I would love to see them make some updates to make the CPU a little more powerful, but that's probably coming in a Mark II version, if it's even coming at all. It's possible that they just made this to be just a niche little device that people who really wanted it would get and everyone else would just stick with controllers. Regardless, I had trouble recommending it because of that and because of its price, and I held off on purchasing it myself for that reason, even though I really enjoyed it and pretty much immediately found myself missing it when I sent it back. Then I started thinking about this, because this actually takes a lot of the Maschine Plus and the Maschine MK3 and scales it down, but sacrifices very little of the hands-on nature of the device, and I'm going to show you that in a second. It's also much less expensive than either device. It's around $300, and that includes the software. That's really easy to recommend to a beginner because that's even lower cost of entry than some DAWs. And with that, you get not only a hardware controller that's absolutely fantastic, and once again, I'm going to get into that in a second, but also incredibly capable software, a fully featured DAW, and multiple synth plugins. That's kind of a no-brainer in my mind, and something that is made even easier to recommend by the fact that it's very easy to use. You can get a lot of the basic functions of this thing pretty quickly, even if you've not worked extensively with music production hardware. And there are a lot of just little features in this thing that I'm going, why don't we see this in some of the hardware that I use day in, day out? That, to be clear, I still love and have absolutely no intention of abandoning. So with all that out of the way, let's actually jump into this thing so I can demonstrate why I like it so much. So for the hands-on portion of this video, I've got this plugged into my laptop. I'm not going to show you my screen because that's not really the point of this, and this is not really meant to be a tutorial. This is just a very quick demonstration of just how cleverly this thing is laid out and why I really like it. So the first thing about the Maschine workflow that I find really inspiring is the way groups work. Essentially, you can get these packs of sounds where they will have every single pad populated with a bunch of sounds. Some of them are percussion, some of them are melodic. They'll just be laid out on the pads, so you can just load one up or make one yourself and then pretty quickly jump into coming up with a new part. Just like that, just finger drumming on this thing. That's a super inspiring way to work. And you've got hands-on control of all that kind of stuff too, because if I hold down the group button, I can just go to another group. And you can layer a bunch of groups on top of each other. So So you can cherry pick sounds from a bunch of groups, or you can load sounds into each individual pad. That's completely up to you. What I typically like to do is start with one group that kind of makes my ears perk up a little bit, come up with a central song idea, and then just keep adding groups. So let me just go to a new one. I can hit the search button here, and I can just start cycling through groups. And that's scrolling through the list on my computer. And if I do go into my computer, I can actually narrow down exactly where it's pulling its list from. Looks like they did some chops here. That's fun. Let me go to the second group, because this was something I was messing around with earlier. So that's already pretty cool. However, each of these sounds actually operates independently. Like, they can have all their own settings and effects. And this gets a lot deeper than you'd expect. For instance, let me just select this. I have to go back and forth for some reason. This little pluck sound, I can go to keyboard. Now that's actually laid out across a keyboard. And I can change things like where my root note's at. Just using this tiny screen. They make really good use of the tiny screen, surprisingly enough. And then I can even choose the scale bank. For instance, let's just have main selected. I can go forward, and then it can be chromatic, major. You can see these extra bright ones are octaves. That's all super intuitive. We've got chords. And we've got the step sequencer, which will correlate to the piano roll on the screen. So if you want to make an edit to a part that you just played, so you want to just change one note or nudge one note forward or backwards, all that kind of stuff, you can do that just on here using this dial and these pads, and then just look up at your screen occasionally to make sure that nothing is going wrong. You don't have to touch your mouse at all if you don't want to. That's really cool. What I'll usually do is I'll play out a whole section. And then I'll dive into a few of these individual sounds and start giving them some notes and chords and such. So a lot of hands-on control. Of course, you've got your restart to play. You can activate the metronome. You can tap the tempo, record with or without count-in. The shift gives you some useful controls. You've got all sorts of hands-on control here on this little device. So much so that it feels bigger than it actually is. And to get more into Groovebox territory, once again, this isn't a Groovebox, but it shares some design decisions. You can access your bank of patterns. You can launch patterns from here. You can also do the same with scenes and select different scenes which have groupings of patterns in them. You can duplicate or double a pattern. You can solo stuff. You can select stuff. You've got a bunch of control in here that I haven't even fully dove into yet. You know, like I showed you earlier, you can search through stuff, even tweak some stuff about plugins. I typically do like to do my actual mixing and mastering with a mouse and keyboard. I do prefer that than trying to get this to do that. That's the one thing where it's kind of weak, where the bigger machine or the Machine Plus would excel, where this would fall a little short. But even then, you can use this to select the sound that you want to add effects to, and that speeds it up a bit because it's just a little bit clunky in the DAW version of this. This helps with that. Of course, you've got stuff like fixed velocity. This thing is velocity sensitive if you want it to be. You can do things like ARPs, and you have a bunch of parameters that you can tweak. And this also has a note repeat in there for like hi-hat ratchets and glitches and such. That's all in here. I'm very impressed by the way they've laid it out. And there are even little quality of life things like a count-in. Which, like, some groove boxes still haven't gotten around to. Like, there are a bunch of little things in the workflow of this thing that make me go, why haven't groove boxes picked up on it? The answer is almost certainly technical limitations, but still, I would love to see the design philosophy of this adopted more and more in standalone music production devices. They don't have to be big, just they have to be quick and intuitive to use to not break the flow of a music production session. That's what this does really well, and it's pretty easy to pick up the bare bones basics, and so beginners probably won't have too hard of a time with it, and people experienced with both hardware and DAWs, this thing's gonna feel just heavenly in terms of how immediate and fast it is to use. So there's really a lot that I like about the way this thing is put together. Like, Native Instruments have been doing their thing with the machines for quite a while, and this is very well thought out as a result. It also fits very well into my love of kind of a minimalist aesthetic when it comes to music production. You know, it's small, but it doesn't feel small. It can fit easily in a backpack. You can have just this, a laptop, and a pair of headphones, and that's like all you need, which is very appealing to me. And even down to just the way it looks. Like, the thing just looks minimalist. For my Groovebox audience, this definitely gets into Groovebox territory. Like, if your computer is powerful enough to just run a ton of virtual instruments and have like low latency with either ASIO drivers or low buffer settings or whatnot, this is kind of a no-brainer. If you like the hands-on workflow and the machine sound, which not everyone will, and that's very understandable, but if you are a fan of that, in my mind, this is a really easy recommendation. You get so much more than you pay for it. I would have happily paid more for this if it was sold for that much, and I got mine on a pretty good deal secondhand. So at this point, if this seems appealing to you, but you're still on the fence and maybe willing to spend a bit more, I would recommend checking out my Maschine Plus video up over here. And if you would like to see a review of a completely self-contained music production device that's quite a bit less expensive than the Maschine Plus, you can click or tap down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.